and leader of his party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, it's interesting and timely, I guess, that this bill was tabled by the minister today, because it was, 3 years ago this month that this government agreed to a waste reduction goal with the other provinces and territories across the country to get our per person production of waste down to 490 kilograms per person by the end of this decade, and then furthermore to 350 kilograms per person by 2040. Not sure where we're started from, Mr. Speaker, because the last data I could find was for 2012, when New Brunswickers were producing 651 kilograms of waste per person. So how are we doing on achieving this target? Well, we don't know, Mr. Speaker, because the minister hasn't shared anything since this agreement was made by his predecessor to aim for achieving this waste reduction goal. So how are we doing? I don't know. How does this bill contribute to achieving that goal of getting down to 490 kilograms of waste per person? Mr. Speaker, it's not clear from the bill. Has there been a review of the Beverage Containers Act since its inception in 1992? A public review? No, I don't think there has been, Mr. Speaker. Well, I know there hasn't been. It was established in 1992 to reduce the amount of waste going into landfills and to reduce the amount of packaging. And one of the things that it was trying to encourage at the time was to increase the number of containers that were refillable, like beer from Moosehead in bottles. They're refillable. They get washed, reused, refilled, so we're not continually increasing the consumption of raw materials and all the energy that goes with producing those materials by reusing those containers. But we had refillable soft drink containers at the time, Mr. Speaker. At the time, we had, when this was brought in, the intent was to increase the volume of refillable soft drink containers on the market, Mr. Speaker, and it failed. You can't find a refillable soft drink container today. Young people would imagine they never existed. In fact, we've seen a tremendous shift away from glass containers to aluminum containers, Mr. Speaker, and those aluminum containers have an extremely high carbon content because of the extreme high carbon content involved in aluminum production or energy content, Mr. Speaker. So this is an important issue that we need to consider in the grand scheme of things, Mr. Speaker. So there needs to be actually a proper review of the Beverage Containers Act, and there hasn't been. We know that the deposits haven't gone up since 1992. 1992. And you can see the impact. Back in 92, when the Beverage Container Act was brought in, litter disappeared from the sides of our roads because no one's going to throw away money. And that is beverage container litter. But it's back. There's a lot. I clean up Forest Hill Road as part of the Fredericton cleanup when we have it, and I can tell you there's a lot of beverage containers tossed out of windows because the deposits now, you know, are small, relatively speaking. Inflation has eaten up their value since 1992. So there needs to be a look at that, and that should be part of the review. And I was hoping that in this Beverage Containers Act that we would see movement on the deposit system so that we reclaimed or reestablished the value that the deposits back in 1992 had, because they were working in terms of reducing litter, and that's not happening anymore. I did try and find information on the minister's website, Mr. Speaker, about waste reduction and diversion and the effectiveness of the Beverage Containers Act, and what I found was a waste reduction and diversion and action plan for New Brunswick dated the fall of 2001. So 20 years later, Mr. Speaker, here we are. Now, to be fair, I know that his staff are working 20 years later, which is great. You've got to start somewhere, on a new waste reduction and diversion plan for New Brunswick, and that's encouraging. But how this all fits together is unclear, Mr. Speaker, so we will have lots of questions about that in the committee stage. There's no question about that in my mind. So just right now, with beverage containers, one of the other things that's happened is we actually are paying as consumers for some of the recycling costs through our deposits, whereas the original idea was that the producers of the product would pay for the recycling costs. So I hope this Beverage Containers Act bill doesn't seem to address that either, as is the case for some other waste streams. So that needs to be addressed, Mr. Speaker, because, you know, as I said, the original idea, one of the original ideas was to increase the use of refillable containers. And incidentally, we've seen a reduction in the use and availability of growlers, which was a very popular way of refilling beer containers, so you don't have huge volumes of waste containers produced. And we don't see those anymore much for beer. So again, there are a lot of questions around what is happening in the area of waste production and waste recycling. But with respect to the refillables, the original idea was when you say you have a deposit for a dime, 10-cent deposit on a beverage container, the idea was that you would get it all back on a refillable container, but they largely disappeared. So you only get half of it back. Where does that nickel go, Mr. Speaker? Well, that nickel goes to subsidize the recycling of those containers that the industry is supplying. So that needs to be fixed, Mr. Speaker. So it's a little discouraging, really, in a way, that the minister has brought forward this bill to amend the Beverage Containers Act ahead of a major new initiative to deal with an update of the 2001 Waste Reduction Diversion Action Plan for New Brunswick. It seems to me the right way around would have been to do that first, and to have the information in front of us about how manufacturers are going to actually carry out their recycling under the new Packaging and Paper Extended Producer Responsibility Program, and then we could look at the Beverage Containers Act in that context. So it seems like a half measure, Mr. Speaker. It seems very focused on trying to reduce costs to NB Liquor rather than to try and reduce the actual generation of waste as a result of beverage containers and ensure that those that are produced are diverted. So we'll have lots to talk about at committee, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.